Welcome back to Two Homers and a Realist. This is a special edition where it's Meet a Homer or a Realist. And today we're all together sitting out under the pergola, grapevine above us. We're constructing the studio, so you may hear some construction in the background. They got a lot of people working on it. They got 4 full crews. But today we're going to take some time to meet Connor. So Connor, the first question is, are you a homer or are you a realist?
Well, if you're an avid listener to the pod, I would hope you know this by now. But if not, I do identify as a homer for sure. So a founding member of the podcast. I represent the homer side of what we do here.
So what is your OU origin story and history in brief? And we'll get some detailed questions in a second, but just give us your brief overview.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this today. I think I was pretty lucky. So I think most kids follow what their dads traditionally follow from sports teams. My dad was raised an Oklahoma State fan. Went to OSU. I escaped that hold, thankfully.
Sometimes it skips a generation.
Yep. So I think I could truly say born and bred a Sooner fan. Really kind of first part of my life, I think my first Sooner memory, if I can chalk it up, is I remember very briefly the 2000 national championship. Not enough where it was, a satisfying moment. I was 6 then, so
you knew it was great, but you didn't know.
I knew it was a good thing, but I didn't know the implications of it. So, but yeah, I think been going to games for the majority of my life, and excited for hopefully a lively future of OU football.
So, tell us a little bit about your longest current streak, or your longest streaks, your current streak of home games attended, if you've ever had a meaningful streak of time in your past of attending games, home and away, etc.
Yeah, no, I'm disappointed in my home. So my home streak currently is 45 games, and that goes back to...
That's pretty substantial.
Yeah, it goes back, but the only disappointing part is for whatever reason in 2015, I missed the Texas Tech game. So Baker's reintroduction to Texas Tech when they came back in town when he started in 2015. So that was the last game I missed. But 45 straight home games. I think I've missed 1 Texas game out of the past, what would that be now? 14 years. So 13 of 14 OU Texas games. That's dating back to my first Texas game. So nothing substantial like we might hear later on in this series, but 45 straight home games is probably my most notable streak to date.
So what was your first home game, away game, OU Texas game, bowl game?
First home game was the Oklahoma against UCLA 2003 game. Antonio Perkins runs back 3 punts. I sat in I sat in the southeast corner, scorching hot, with my dad and my granddad, who's also an Oklahoma State fan. But even then, I think something like Antonio Perkins running back 3 punts put a smile on an Oklahoma State fan's face. So that was my first home game. First away game was not as pleasant. It was the first time OU had lost to Baylor in 25 years, or something like that, when Robert Griffin III walked off the game with a touchdown. I've never sprinted out of a stadium like I did that day with my dad. So that'd be the first away game. First OU Texas game was with none other than Steve himself, his dad, Ronnie. That was 2009 when Sam Bradford got re-injured in the very, very poorly officiated, in my opinion, OU Texas game. One that Landry Jones probably could have won if it wasn't for a couple calls that didn't go our way. So we were in it till the end in that one. And then last one there, bowl game. I think it's my only bowl game. Also went with Steve and the gang there. That would have been the 2019/20 Peach Bowl when OU got rolled by LSU. So it was a tough introduction to bowl games, but playoff game nonetheless. It was a great experience. Atlanta was awesome. That was one of my favorite stadiums that I've been to, even though it was indoor. Great experience all around.
Except for
the massive loss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was going to say something about your history a little bit. So your mother is a lifelong Rabbit OU fan.
Yep.
So
Rabbit is a great way to put it.
yeah, so that's interesting to note that difference and that she married outside of the family, if you will. So my aunt, I was going to games with her. She started going to games. Your dad was around. They were at least dating and then early married. And so he went to a lot of OU games. I would say he definitely is always identified as a Oklahoma fan. He likes OU and OSU. He roots for both teams, that kind of a guy. And I've been to, I don't know, tens of games with him, home and OU Texas games. And he definitely is a true fan that cheers for OU. He just cheers for OSU when the two play, and he sides with OSU.
And I'd be curious to ask him now if it still trends that way.
Yeah.
Just how much he's around OU, how much he's around myself, my sister, us as a group. I'd be interested to see what his answer is, or hear what his answer is in that Bedlam game, who he'd actually root for now.
Yeah, what
maybe we've
pulls on
we've
him.
done a conversion on him. So
and I know your granddad, who's passed away. He definitely was always an OSU fan. I don't think he cared
that whole
for
side
OU
of the
much
family,
at all. Yeah, your uncle strong with the dark side of the force there.
Yeah,
but that's interesting.
it's a rich. I think a lot of my history is chalked up to our grandpa. Les, I think, I wasn't around him. I don't have any memories of him really, but I think my mom, being as strong-willed as she is and being a daddy's girl, with Les definitely has played a big role in me being the fan that I am today.
He was a strong, lifelong OU fan, and definitely that'll be part of my origin story when we get to it. So, what has been your favorite OU season so far? Reserving the right for a future season to take over.
Right, that sounds tough. We all remember, as a recency bias is in my head a lot with 2017. That's such a great season with Baker and just that team holistically. I really, really enjoyed the 2008 season though. I think that's when my fandom really took off as well. And I latched on to that team who, outside of that Texas game, was just a world beater of a team with Bradford and that offense. And
you would have been, 14-ish around then?
Yeah.
So that makes sense. That's your prime years of coming into it.
We'll get into it later in the questions, but one of the biggest games that sticks out and a big reason I love that season so much is that Texas Tech game and just what that meant. So
that was an electric game.
Just an electric game, an electric season, an electric team. I think that's when, I don't know, we just really saw our offense take off as well. That was a great example of that. So 2008, I think I would say, if I had to really pick one.
It's an interesting, something that just occurs to me about that. It was sort of a transition in Bob Stoops' tenure from being a defense-dominated team to an offense-dominated team.
Yep.
And that obviously stuck up until maybe what we'd say we're evolving back into today.
Absolutely.
All right, so if you could schedule any home-and-home series with 3 teams, who would you choose?
This one's tough as well. There's so many great matchups out there I'd like to see. But I think if I had to narrow it down, and we already have a home and home scheduled them pretty soon, Michigan is one team. I think just a great classic matchup. And I don't even know when the last time we played Michigan is. I'm not sure.
Probably, I think, maybe 75 in the Orange Bowl.
Yeah, so great uniform matchup too. Great two blue bloods. So I think that'd be one. I think my second one, Penn State. I'd love to see Penn State come into town. I'd love going up to Happy Valley. I've talked to some fans whom I work with, and they say it's one of the better experiences just from a pure atmosphere perspective, especially if it was something like a whiteout game that we could participate in. So I think that'd be great, a great home and home. And then lastly, selfishly, I'd love to schedule something with USC. Absolutely would love to have the Trojans on the schedule with Lincoln Riley as the coach, just to, hopefully settle differences and put some of those frustrations to bed with two straight wins. So I think that'd be my 3, with a lot of honorable mentions. Teams like Ohio State. I probably didn't put that on the list just because we had a recent home and home and I've experienced it. Awesome experience. I would put some SEC teams on there, but we're going to have those as well. So I kind of thought in the realm of teams that we might not necessarily play soon, but that I'd like to see come to Norman.
When you think about those type of epic matchups, do you have a preference where you'd like to see them be both, assuming you could pick but you wouldn't know, you'd forget and wouldn't know going in and experiencing it, both of them to be blowouts, one to be a blowout, one to be a really close game, both of them close games? How would you choose to experience those?
USC, I would love to see 2 blowouts. I'd love to see 2 curb stomps and leave it and go our separate ways. The other 2, I feel like I'd love to blow out Michigan here in Norman. But a close game up in Michigan would be great. It'd be so fun. Penn State, I probably feel similar. I wouldn't mind seeing 2 close games against Penn State. Just kind of from a that's a great frame of mind though. I mean, how do we feel about that? How do we feel about that in general about all games? I guess I know we talked about it on the last pod. I mean, Lucas loves a blowout. Lucas can sit through Indiana State and watch us win 86-3 and be mad because we gave up a field goal. I do think it depends on the team though. I mean, for sure.
I think we would. You love a great matchup where you pull out the victory in a tight game. You never want that to be against a lesser opponent. You always want the blowout against the lesser opponent.
I guess to that point as well, I would want to see all 3 of those teams be at a peak performance, at their best. I wouldn't want to play a down Penn State or a USC without someone like the offensive guys that they have. I don't necessarily want to play Caleb Williams.
I would like to exercise a demon against him.
I'd like to exercise a demon.
I don't think we're going to get the chance.
I don't think so either.
Hey, national championship this year, so we'll see.
Well, we'll make it, but they won't.
Yeah, that's a good point. They'll lose in the Peach Bowl to Tulane or something.
Well, let's stay on the idea of games and think about notable games in your history, the best and the worst, venues, atmospheres, stadiums, fan experiences in general. And just kind of elaborate on things that stand out in your mind for all the games that you've been to, or ones that you've watched on television.
Yeah.
What were the big ones?
I mean, I mentioned it earlier, and I have to lead off with it. OU Texas Tech 2008. I don't know. Definitely not in Norman. That was the most electric I've ever seen our crowd. I mean, that's the only game I've ever stood up the entire 4 quarters for 60 minutes, and I don't think very many people sat down that entire game. That is the bar, in my opinion. I know we've said some stuff in the coaches have said some stuff in the past about some big home games that, they've mentioned or recounted OU Texas Tech and wanting to get that type of atmosphere. That's going to be hard to replicate. And maybe with the SEC coming in, you're going to get some games like that. But just not only the game itself, but also what that game meant to OU and basically getting over that hump to put us into the Big 12 title game, that was just so big. So that one is at the front of my mind. If I think about away games and similar atmosphere, as well as great fan experience, Tennessee in 2015, probably the loudest place I've ever been in my life, and I was sitting at the top of the stadium. I can't imagine what it was like on the field. We've talked about it a lot here. The Third Down for What song that they were playing, and just I get goosebumps. I'm getting goosebumps now thinking about it.
Do you think they piped in crowd noise
100%.
through the speaker? I do too.
Absolutely.
I find it hard to believe that people could be that loud.
I was sitting right. I was sitting right in front of the scoreboard though, and right in front of the speakers.
Yeah.
Man, it was crazy.
I've talked to Tennessee fans who have said they always have a great atmosphere. I mean, they show up for all the games. But that game, even to their fans, is still like the loudest they've ever had that stadium.
I bet the Bama game that they had this past season probably compares now for some of those folks, but that game that we went to in Tennessee in 2015, that was supposed to put them back on the map. I mean, it really
put us back on the map.
It really did.
Yeah, I mean,
it was a complete
what was that, like a 21 versus 23 type?
Yeah.
I mean, we were both in the top 25, but not in the top 10.
Right.
But both on the rise.
Primetime ABC game, though, and it lived up to all the hype that they built up with it. Atmosphere was great there. Neyland Stadium, not the best infrastructure stadium I've been to.
Old stadium.
So if I want to go that route, I mean, we've been to some great Big 12 stadiums. I mean, Baylor, amazing stadium, so
Small.
much room. What'd you say?
Small,
but
new.
with that comes
Facility-wise,
some
nice
good
for the fan.
amenities. Kansas State, always an awesome experience. We've been up there. I've been up there twice. Their stadium equally is as nice, I'd say. Manhattan's a great town. Everyone loves Kansas State fans. I don't dislike them. I find them obnoxious, though. I mean, and maybe I just feel that way in general on these away games that we've been to lately, just because OU is the
Kansas State. They do every first down. Is that Kansas State?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
Kansas State,
Yeah.
and they've been doing it since the 90s.
and it sucks.
when first downs were a big deal
yeah.
to them.
Yeah, so that gets exhausting, but great experience still. I think worst experiences I've had. Ohio State, amazing experience overall, especially since we won the game. And there's some people that disagree. I didn't meet very many fans that were too courteous, though. Given I probably wasn't the most courteous fan that day. But even the night before, when I was perfectly within my sane mind, I have a good story that I always tell people about. It is my wife and I go to a restaurant, Ohio State fans everywhere, getting looks because we're wearing our OU gear, but nobody says anything really. Go the whole dinner, waitress is okay most of the time, but comes back before we pay, as she's delivering the check, and looks me dead in the eye, and she asked me, "You guys are here for the game, right?" Like, obviously. She goes, "Okay, well, I hope you guys know you came up here to get your ass beat." And I'm like, start giggling, and she just deadpanned and walks off. And I was like, holy
That's
cow.
probably not something a waitress should say before she gets her tip.
Exactly. Well, the tip reflected. So, but we experienced a couple things the night before. Game day wasn't awful. I mean, we went and tailgated with some Ohio State fans. That was not bad. I think what I appreciated about Ohio State is after they lost, had multiple fans after the game respectfully say, something like Baker Mayfield is, unstoppable or some stuff like that. So, Oklahoma State, I haven't had great experiences in Stillwater. Some of that my own doing, but some of that just because I just despise that fan base in general. I think they're ignorant, and I think they show it on game days.
Hey, I mean, how's your dad feel about that?
My dad knows my feelings about Oklahoma State, so
He's ignorant, is what you're saying.
Well, no, apparently not, because he's transitioning into the good part of football.
We're not talking politics on here.
I'm trying to think other notable games.
Tell us about the Cotton Bowl.
Yeah, of course.
Different experiences at OU Texas.
Oh man, so I've learned from the greats, Steve and his family, and Mike. My favorite thing, and my wife knows this.
You never went to one with Brian.
Went to one with Brian.
Wow.
But my favorite experience, or one of my favorite things at the Cotton Bowl, is getting there early, getting out in front of the Texas band, and just releasing so much hatred towards those little dummies. But that, I still think, would be a great game to play at Jerry World. However, I will caveat that with, there is no other atmosphere, at least that I've experienced, and that seemingly in college football, that compares to that. I mean, there is a lot of brewing hate on both sides. Luckily, during most of my fandom, OU's been on the more fortunate side of that game. But there's also not a lot worse than having to leave the Cotton Bowl after a loss and have to weather that crowd and have to sweat and fight your way out for 45 minutes just to get out of the crowd and the stadium in general, while wanting nothing more than solitude and to go home and lick your wounds because you just got beat by your biggest rival. But I think that's what makes that game so great, and I love it. I love that game. I don't know how people who call themselves huge fans and who attend most games can't pencil that in every single season.
That sounds like a shot at me.
So we'll get to that later. No, I mean, it's such an amazing rivalry, and I think I'm really, really thankful for the fact that we are making the jump to the SEC with Texas. I think it's a great move, and the people who want to argue that and I say people, the OSU fans that want to argue that, you know, Bedlam is as big of a rivalry as OU Texas and that we're losing a rival with OSU, like, it's just not correct. Our rival is going with us to be better in a better conference, and I'm glad that we get to stick around that game for years to come, it looks like.
Well, let's touch on Bedlam then for a second. So what is your optimal future for Bedlam? Never, occasionally, every year?
I wouldn't say never, because it'd be fun to play most Power 5 teams, at least sometimes. I don't think we ever need to. I would say very, very occasionally. And I'll echo kind of my sentiments in the last pod. If there's something that has to happen between the presidents, that they want nothing more than to make an agreement and make something work, one series a decade or one game a decade where Oklahoma State has to come to Norman, I would accept that. But there's no need to play them, in my opinion. So I would take the occasional game, but if it never happened again, I also would not. There would be no, you know, hard feelings on my part.
What, in your history of watching and being a fan, let's limit it to that, what would be a loss, or, and you can discuss ones that are under consideration, but a loss that you would change if you had the magic touch?
So I think I'm not going to give my answer first. I'll say the one that I almost gave, because it was that season, my first big season as being a fan. OU Florida like really hurt. That national championship was painful, and we've talked about it a lot. OU fans talk about it a lot. DeMarco Murray plays that game. I think we win. There's a couple other things that didn't go our way in that game, and if one or two things go differently, we probably do win. That one really sucked. But if I had to give an answer, the OU Georgia game, the Rose Bowl, was, I mean, that hurt so bad. And it wasn't a national championship game, but all signs were pointing to us beating that Bama team that eventually wins the national title.
And being back in the title game for the first time in so long.
Yeah, and that's what's crazy, is we haven't been there in so long, right? I mean, we're going on 14 years this year. So
that is crazy.
Yeah. And just that the whole thing where the pendulum is swinging in OU's direction most of the first half, it swings completely back in Georgia's favor in the second half. Stephen Parker gets the scoop and score. I'll never forget, we're pouring Old Fashions, not out of celebration, but just saying, man, what a game. Like,
yeah, well, celebration, but not
celebrating.
Not celebrating victory,
Right.
But celebrating however this goes from here.
Yeah.
This has been
What a
epic and
game.
beautiful.
And then to lose the way we lost, yeah, it was just like knife to the heart. I've never watched any part of that game ever again since then.
Oh, I've watched it several times.
I can't. It's so
interesting
so
how
difficult.
different people deal with grief.
Yeah. So I would take that one back. I don't know if it necessarily changes anything for the later seasons for OU, but just to be back in the national title game, having an iconic matchup of OU Bama, where the last time we had played them, we had smoked them in the Sugar Bowl. So there would have been a lot of good storylines around that game had it happened. So
this is a discussion we've had in the past. Would you rather go into a lesser bowl game than a playoff, knowing that and getting the victory, that way when you go into the off season you're on a high, or getting the chance to win national championship by making the playoff but know that you're probably going to lose?
I've got to go with the latter. The playoffs always have to be the goal, where I know that I've had this maybe sometimes blind optimism. I mean, the game that I went to.
You are a homer.
Yes, exactly. So the 2019 LSU game, where Joe Burrow was the second closest thing to God that year in terms of just what he was doing and what he was able to do with the football. That whole team, I mean, talk about a team of destiny. That team was, but I went into that game like, all right, like, we've got a shot here. Like, there's one or two things that maybe need to work out a certain way, where you look at the line that Vegas put up, probably shouldn't be that optimistic about that game. But that all being said, I
don't know how optimistic you were. You were saying we had a chance. You were saying we
Yeah.
had an underappreciated chance. You weren't saying we're going to win the game.
Right. I would still much rather have that opportunity to win a game like that, because And I go back to that Sugar Bowl against Alabama in 2013, after the 2013 season, where we beat Oklahoma State on the road, crazy win that probably shouldn't have happened. There was a lot of bad stuff that happened that game. Trevor Knight gets hurt. Trevor Knight gets hurt. Kendall Thompson comes in. Blake Bell has to come in, win the game for us. All signs pointed to OSU being the team that should have won that game. And then celebrating. Well, we get Bama in the Sugar Bowl because we win that game.
17-point dogs, something like that.
Huge underdogs, and we go and we win that game. That feeling of winning that game, at least as a fan, and given we won, that feeling so far, and maybe even the risk of losing built into that, it so far outweighs, I mean, the Insight Bowl beating Iowa in, the 2 year prior, something like that. So I would always take the chance in the playoff, even if we're the big underdogs that we've been a couple of times, Bama, LSU, at least to have a chance at that game, because crazy things do happen. So I don't know how big of losing to Florida State this last year, even if we would have won that game, yeah, we go out on a high, but the fact we lost it, doesn't hurt us as a team very much either. So I don't know. It's I'd always want the chance to win a big game like a playoff game.
What is your biggest concern for OU now?
The move to the
concerns.
SEC.
You can
The move to
begin
the
more than one.
SEC. I'm just. There's so much unknown right now with this team coming off a 6-7 season, and I do think I have a very strong confidence we're going to be a much better team. I think we're going to be a great team this season. But that into consideration, we have to show that, and we actually have to be that. And I think you need a very solid season to set yourself up for what's coming next year. I think things just start moving a lot faster when we move to the SEC in terms of just, I think you need to set a certain standard of OU football that we're used to and winning football to be able to keep up with these teams. We talked about it last week where we all used to kind of scoff at, week in, week out in the SEC, like that narrative. Well, it is going to be week in and week out in the SEC, especially that first season when we've got huge targets on our back because we're the new guys. Everyone's going to want to beat us because we're OU, right? We are a blue blood program.
And it really is going to keep getting stronger.
And winning is an expectation, not just from OU fans, from a national perspective as well. OU wins football games. So we need to, I'm I guess not concerned about, I'm just cautious. We need to be winning football. We need to be winning football games. Other concerns, coaching, like poor coaching that we've talked about last season, the Jeff Lebby stuff that we talked about last season. I'm ready to hopefully put some of that to bed because we're scoring a lot of points and winning games. So outside of that, I think, the administration, I think Brent Venables is the guy for the job from a head coach perspective. But I think they're doing everything they can to put OU in a position to succeed in the long run, as opposed to being this, we keep seeing the Nebraska, the comparison to Nebraska, and I think that's so far off base, and it's so uninformed. And it's funny to me, Texas fans saying stuff like that when, Texas is going to be the next Texas A&M. So, it can go both ways.
I have one more question, but I want to see if you guys have any questions that occur to you. So, how optimistic are you for OU's future? Not just near term, but long term.
If I had to put it on a 10-point scale, I'm a 7.5.
That's not very homerish of you.
Maybe it is.
75% optimistic, 25% worried. And that's just because we're coming off a really bitter 6-7 season. And again, if I look back and I spend enough time in my own thought about all those games that we should have won last year and could have been a 9-3 team, that 7.5 probably goes up to 8.5. I think we're doing all the right things with recruiting, I think we're stepping up in the NIL scene. So I'm optimistic from a long-term perspective with where we're headed. And I think the move to the SEC, where college football is going, I think OU is willing to change with that to make sure that they stay at the front of the pack and not drift into this middle, oh, we're going to Norman type of mentality for teams. I think we're going to be a destination for coaching and for players. And I expect that to be the case for a long time.
So this will be a difficult comparison to make, and I know I said one last question, but this is an offshoot of that question. Frame how your optimism is today versus how it was in 2016, 2017, as the Lincoln Riley era began. Not how you felt then, but how you think you reasonably could have felt about it with a little bit of hindsight. And I don't mean knowing that he's going to leave. That's not predetermined, let's assume. But based on where we were positioned then at the departure of Bob Stoops and the Lincoln Riley era beginning, are you more or less optimistic today than you had a right to be back then?
I think when Lincoln Riley stepped in, I'd probably say I was more optimistic then. I mean, the way that Bob...
And had a right to be more optimistic.
Exactly. The way that Bob passed the reins and the team that he left Lincoln with, the players that he left Lincoln with Baker and those guys for 17, it obviously lends to the success that Lincoln did have that season. You shift gears, and maybe my real transition from optimistic to, oh shit, I don't know if this is it, was after 2018, after Kyler leaves. We have no sign of a defense at all. And then, that hasn't changed really. That really hasn't changed at all. We had signs of a defense last year, but the defense didn't show up. So I guess if you were to ask me the long-term question after the 2018 season, I'm a lot more nervous because I don't feel like there's a direction to the program from a coaching perspective.
So it was there to be had but lost for a while.
And Lincoln went into that shell where he was so mysterious about everything. And there was no transparency between the football team that we support and the fans who were supporting it to understand, there was no connection there, right? I think despite the season that he had, the fact that Brent Venables made that his number one priority when he came in was to reconnect the fans and the team and, kind of set that cornerstone of OU football is nothing without the fans that they have. And I think that's why Venables probably has so much support still and has my optimism, has my homerism still, is Venables has a vision for where he's going. And I think he's been explicit about that. Lincoln Riley, his vision was, hey, you guys are going to see these 5-star recruits roll in at wide receiver and at quarterback and running back. Be happy with that, because that's all he's really about, in my opinion. I think Venables has set the stage across the board, not only just from a personnel perspective, but from what he's doing off the field and everything like that. There's just a lot more of a confidence there that I have with this staff, despite 6-7, than I had after the 2018 season when, again, not a lot of direction. And then I can't imagine what our conversations would have been in the offseason last year if Lincoln wouldn't have left. And, I know after that Oklahoma State game that we lost the day before Lincoln leaves, I'm just I don't know what this team is. I don't know what they are. And we said that all that season. I think we know what this team is for Venables, and I think it's heading in a really good direction.
All right. Well, that's excellent. Now the audience knows Connor.
Hey, thank you guys. Boomer Sooner. Hey, homers for life, right?
Homers for life. That's right. All right. Well, until next time, Boomer
Sooner.